Bears inspire awe and cuteness whenever they're mentioned. I mean, that's how they're represented in cartoon shows and in their world famous adaptation, teddy bears. Polar bears look cuter because of their color and peaceful disposition, but did you know that polar bears are the top predators of the Arctic? The attacks might be surprisingly rare, but they're absolutely deadly. We're going to talk about one such attack on April Hernandez. How did the polar bear come into her contact? Did she survive the attack? What can you do to save yourself if any such situation arises? Before we get into this gut-wrenching anecdote, I kindly ask you to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you become a member of the Fierce Zone family. Thank you in advance. Polar bears are attractive to humans due to their white fur and black noses. However, we frequently forget that polar bears are hunters who primarily feed on seals, walruses, and whales, and they do occasionally attack humans. You say, how? All this happened in Kvitova. Forgive me if I pronounced that wrong. Kvitova, also known as the White Island, is an island in the Svalbard archipelago. The island is located in the easternmost part of Norway and is the closest to Russia's Arctic possession. It's also the most remote island in Svalbard and is completely covered by ice caps, which explains why it's known as the White Island of the archipelago. Despite its beauty, it's usually the place that witnesses polar bear attacks the most. A polar bear killed a Dutch boy, Johan Jacobus Koot, and injured 7 others on the Norwegian island of Spitsbergen in August 2011. These people had been enjoying themselves on a campsite when the bear attacked them. This wasn't the first time polar bears have attacked humans. The unfortunate part of the incident was that one of them shot the polar bear on the spot. In Canada alone, 6 people have been killed by polar bears in the last 20 years. One person was killed in Norway during the same time period. This is the same place where the polar bear showed no mercy to April Hernandez. These were just some snippets. The following story is gonna blow your mind and give you goosebumps with its bone-chilling details. Before we continue digging deep into the story of April Hernandez and her husband, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Thank you in advance. Hank and April Hernandez were among the many tourists aboard a cruise from Spitsbergen to Victoria. The cruise service offered tourists breathtaking views of the nearby Arctic, as well as some animals such as whales, seals, and even polar bears. The tourists were excited about witnessing the picturesque landscape and even their encounters with wild animals. The tourists were dropped off at the coast of Kvitova after the half-hour cruise, where they would see a spectacular view of the massive Kvitujoklen ice cap in front of them. Hank, April, and the other 18 tourists were so taken aback by the scenery that they began taking photos and videos to remember their trip. No one was aware of what was going on around them. Tourists visit this majestic place because the island is also known for its large walrus population, so it's kind of a package where you get to enjoy the flora and fauna of the Arctic Circle. Some of the visitors were wildlife photographers waiting in the hope to get a close-up shot of the dreadful polar bear, whales, seals, or massive walrus. Little did they know, it wasn't a zoo where animals are confined to a closed space. They were going out into the wild, and they had to be prepared for that. Hank and April decided to sit near the coast and have rest and have a picnic after seeing the ice cap because they were somewhat tired from the trip. Moreover, they wanted to take in as much as they could of the beautiful landscape before leaving the place. Their stay on Kvitova would only be 3 hours before they were cruised back to Spitsbergen, so they had to make the most of their time here. All the tourists were excited, and it could be told from the noise that they had been making. Hank and April were peacefully eating their sandwiches when they heard tourists screaming from a distance. The couple assumed they were shouting out of excitement, so they didn't mind and went back to enjoying their time together. They had no idea what was about to happen to them. In an instant, a mid-sized polar bear grabbed April by the right leg and dragged her across the coast. For a moment, Hank couldn't decide what was happening. Surprised and terrified, he rose from his seat and started chasing the polar bear that was thrashing his wife. April kept screaming for help as the polar bear continued to drag her away from the coast. She could feel the clawed paws of the polar bear piercing her leg. She started counting her last moments as she saw no hope. Her life flashed before her eyes in an instant. Hank had already been screaming as he chased the polar bear with April in his claws until some authorities arrived. They honked their horns loudly to scare the polar bear away from its victim. The technique worked quite fine as the polar bear, which was about to bite through April's leg, got startled as it heard the honking of the air horns. As the authorities kept scaring the polar bear away with various sounds, the animal became agitated. The polar bear left April unconscious and wounded on the spot. But this was not the end. Instead of running away, the polar bear went after the officials. Hank, the authorities, and the tourists were all taken aback by the sudden attack. They didn't know what to do, save April, who was lying unconscious and needed immediate medical attention, or save themselves. April was not conscious and had to be taken to a hospital for treatment following the heinous incident. The authorities shot fire to scare the polar bear away, and April was taken to the hospital. Thankfully, she survived the attack. To avoid similar incidents in the future, the Kitawa authorities have decided to exercise greater caution and improve their tour-related measures. When polar bears attack humans, it's usually because they're starving and desperate for food. Come to think of it, humans are the reason for all these attacks, so we should hardly be crying about these, right? Polar bears are enormous, predatory, and extremely dangerous. If they appear cuddly and cute to you, reconsider, because this giant bear is twice the size of a Siberian tiger and will not hesitate to attack you if you enter its territory. The fact that it'll try to devour anything as long as it has meat and will always attack anything it sees, like a ruthless killer, adds to its terrifying nature. Polar bear attacks are unusually rare. Polar bears depend heavily on sea ice for transportation, hunting, resting, mating, and in some areas, maternal dens. However, due to the ongoing and potential loss of sea ice habitat due to climate change, the primary threat to polar bears across the Arctic, polar bears were listed as a threatened species in the United States under the Endangered Species Act in May 2008. Polar bears are spending longer periods on land as their sea ice habitat recedes earlier in the spring and forms later in the fall, and they're often drawn to areas where humans live. The Arctic is one of North America's and the world's last relatively intact ecosystems. However, the Western Arctic has been warming at the fastest rate in the world for the last 3 decades, at 1.5 degrees per decade. The organisms living in the Arctic are among the most vulnerable. Organisms in this region have adapted to such a specific and extreme climate that any change, no matter how minor, can have devastating consequences for a population. Several threats exist that could lead to the extinction of polar bears by 2100. Climate change, oil and other development, pollution, hunting and self-defense killing, intraspecific predation, tourism in the Arctic, and capture for the public display are the most serious of these threats. Whatever happens to April Hernandez can happen to anyone out there. Polar bears are animals and they need food. It is we who need to take precautions and stay safe. To reduce the number of dangerous interactions between humans and polar bears, Svalbard authorities now review their guidelines on a regular basis. At the same time, Svalbard is experiencing a tourism boom. Visitor nights on the archipelago reached 18,000 in July, a 14% increase year on year. The chances of a hungry bear encountering a human are increasing. This needs to be reduced. Do share in comments what you think about this incident. Do humans deserve this? And since you stuck with me till the end, I'd like to thank you for watching this video. And if you haven't already, I'd like to ask you to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.